Today we're going to have the extreme privilege of speaking with Representative Mary Gonzalez from Texas, and we'll get to that in a little bit. And I want you all, as you're hearing from her, and I ask a few initial questions, to think about what you might want to ask. But first we'll start off with a little bit about the initiative, and we'll start with some statistics on Latina underrepresentation in the United States. So there's a webinar. So VoteRunLead is our partner in this effort, and as you can see here from their tagline, it's a national nonpartisan organization unleashing the power of women leaders in democracy through training, technology, and community. So they have done a tremendous job in putting the civic space into the tech space and making the two communicate together. And we're excited to have this Latinas in Leadership webinar series. This is the first set. This is actually the third webinar in the series. We have two more coming up down the pike. So all of you who have signed up today are on the list to be on the next few. And then we'll have another kind of 202 level starting in January when the new with the next Congress that is going to be elected on November 4th. A quick plug for the National Go Run. I'm going to go back there really quickly. I'm excited to attend this along with a few colleagues here and women from around the country who are thinking about running for office, definitely sure they want to run in 5 years. Maybe it's a voice in the back of their mind that's thinking, I could run someday, maybe, I'm not sure. This is the conference for you. So there's going to be people around the country, trainers talking about everything from ground game and getting voters out to public speaking to developing a candidate plan. So if you are available the 21st through the 23rd of November and you hike all the way out to Minneapolis, we would love to see you there. Another project VoteRunLead is working on is Invitation Nation. So far it looks like 5,802 women have been invited to run for office. A lot of women who are familiar with the women in politics literature know that one of the biggest reasons women don't run for office is because they aren't asked. And one of our friends at the Center for American Women in Politics, Debbie Walsh, always says, women run to do something and men run to be somebody. And a lot of times I think women think that they need to be recognized by others, people need to come to them and recruit them, and a lot of times men are just born with that confidence and think that they are qualified and able to run. And sometimes we need to give our female friends a little more support and encouragement. And so VoteRunLead has launched this fantastic initiative. If you get on Twitter with hashtag #InvitationNation, invite a friend, and they also have this really fun, you can see this Target meme generator, they have e-cards, so check out their website at voterunlead.org. Now for some scary statistics on Latina representation in the United States, especially for those of you who haven't joined a webinar before or aren't as familiar with the political landscape for Latinas. First off, VoteRunLead has had this really fun hashtag Scary Politics campaign. And one of the most frightening statistics I came across was that women of color represent only 4.5% of Congress. That's pretty scary. And talking about Latinas in politics, 25 million Latinas live in the United States, and of the 8,236 seats in state and national political office, only about 109 are held by Latinas. Hopefully that will change on November 4th, so watch a lot, however you can this weekend, make calls, get involved, because a lot of the decisions that are going to be made by this next Congress are going to have a tremendous impact on our lives. Another scary statistic is that there have been more than, since the inception of Congress, 12,000 members that have served in that body. So 12,000 members, only 10 have been Latina. So that's about 0.001% of our representatives in Congress have been Latina. And with the numbers of Latinas growing in the United States with each census, there's going to be a tremendous mismatch in people who are making public policies that are defining our lives and our experiences every day. So in terms of Latinas who are serving in Congress today, there are 9 currently serving. No Latina has ever served in the United States Senate, and only one has served as governor, and that is Susana Martinez in New Mexico. Here I just wanted to plug, we recently put up a blog post by Cristina Bejarano, who is a professor at the University of Kansas, who has been profiling a lot of the Latinas running for office this cycle. So if you go on to politicalparity.org after this webinar and go to the blog, you can see a lot of the Latinas running and where they're running and if they have challengers or if they're incumbents. So we see people running or currently in office from Arizona, California, Florida, Nevada. We have New Mexico, New York, Texas, Utah, and Washington. And here you can see the 2014 Latina candidates for statewide executive office. So we have Governor Susana Martinez, Lieutenant Governor Annette Taddeo, Lieutenant Governor Evelyn Sanguinetti, Lieutenant Governor Lucy Flores, Lieutenant Governor Leticia Van de Putte, and Secretary of State Nelly Gorbea. And so these are all candidates running this cycle. So in terms of today's webinar, and a lot of the Latinas Represent research, we found three major things that are important in electing the next generation of Latina leaders. One is mentorship, the importance of stewarding future leaders and creating a cohort of Latinas to mentor the new generation in public office. The second is targeting, so focusing on majority-minority districts to run Latinas. And the last is recruiting, building a path and a pipeline for the next generation of Latina leaders. But today we're going to focus a little bit on mentorship. And for that, we are delighted to have State Representative Mary Gonzalez joining us today. Mary?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Can everyone else? Let us know in the chat box if everyone can hear. Perfect. Okay, great. So we are delighted to have Representative Gonzalez joining us today. She is serving her first term in Texas's District 75. The oldest of 11 children and a Texas native, she's dedicated her life to promoting social change by improving public schools, increasing economic development, supporting agriculture, and expanding access to public water. Prior to her election in 2012, Representative Gonzalez worked for Texas State Representatives Paul Moreno and Richard Raymond. She's also served as the Assistant Director in the Office of Research and Demonstration at the National Hispanic Institute, Program Coordinator in the Multicultural Engagement Center at the University of Texas at Austin, and the Assistant Dean for Student Multicultural Affairs at Southwestern University. Most recently, she was a visiting instructor at Southwestern University. Let's kick this off with how you first got involved in politics.
That is a loaded question because I think I've always been involved in politics. My father and I are very close, and he was on the school board, and when I was growing up, we would watch Meet the Press and The West Wing instead of watching cartoons, and I think early on I was shown the possibilities of the political world to create change and impact people's lives at an individual level. But more officially, when I went to college and worked for legislators, that is when I started to get involved in the political process as more than a concept, but actually through action.
So you clearly already from your early life had exposure maybe through your family, through Meet the Press, to politics, but how did that ultimately develop into a decision to actually run for office? What factors were you weighing and making?
I saw that it was very slow in creating social justice, and so I got really frustrated. At that point, I decided that I was going to leave the political world and I was going to be really involved in education. And that decision was because I was looking around and I was wondering what was creating change, because my goal in life is to eliminate oppression, to promote social justice, to create a world that recognizes individual humanity. And so when I thought about those ideas, it was my professors, it was my deans, it was my administrators that were creating this consciousness in me that I wanted to facilitate in other people. So I went into education and I fell in love with that world. But in Texas in 2011, during that legislative session, the legislature cut $5.4 billion in public school funding. And Texas is the second fastest growing state in the country. So I go talk to classrooms all the time and I ask students, is Texas getting bigger or getting smaller? And they say, well, it's getting bigger. And I ask them, well, are your classrooms getting bigger or getting smaller? And they say, well, they're getting, larger, there's more students. And I said, well, do you think that leaders should be putting more money into school or less money. And they always say more money because they see that their classrooms are getting bigger. But yet the legislature in 2011 decided to cut not $1 billion or $2 billion, but $5.4 billion. And so even though I had left the political world to be in the education world, the truth is that the political world was impacting my new educational focus. And so that was kind of what planted the seed for me to think about getting involved. Annie's List is an organization in Texas that helps women get elected. Because in the history of Texas, since 1845, we've elected nearly 5,000 state legislators. Nearly 5,000. And out of all that 5,000, only 128 have been women. And so we have had a really difficult problem trying to make sure women are in office, and even more difficult for Latinas. And so Annie's List is an organization that intentionally and strategically works to try to interrupt the patterns of leadership. So Annie's List saw an open seat in House District 75 and said, we are going to target that seat and we're going to find a woman. And they searched and searched and searched and could not find someone who wanted to run for office. But someone told them that there was this young woman from that district who wanted to be involved in politics but left. And Annie's List found me. They asked me to run. They asked me to run 7 times before I finally maybe thought about it. But the one conversation that made me do it was a conversation with my student. When my student told me, Mary, you always tell us to go out and create change, to put ourselves at the forefront, to be willing to sacrifice, and here Annie's List is asking you to do the same thing. And that conversation made me realize that if I truly want to see change, then I have to reconsider maybe what my path was at the time.
Wow, so you were essentially recruited by Annie's List in one of your classes.
Well, I was recruited by Annie's List, and then one of my students is the one who convinced me.
Okay. So, like most things in life, a career in politics can't be achieved alone. And you talked a little bit about the support that Annie's List provided you in at least initially recruiting you. I assume they provided some additional support during your campaign started. And then how did you go from there? How did you build your network, and who are the key people that you were looking to support you as you started to assemble your campaign?
So Annie's List was a foundation. They were the ones who recruited me, who trained me, who gave me the first lump of money so that I could start talking to voters instead of worrying about how am I going to pay my campaign team. So that was a very strong foundation. And I think without that type of foundation, it would have been very difficult to be successful. But then I think the second part of that was building a team of people around you who really help you navigate the interesting world of politics and campaigns. And I think my family was very key to that. My father became my campaign treasurer. My mother's office she had an extra room. That's where my campaign office was housed out of, and so she would bring us burritos and feed all the staff. And so it really became a team effort between social justice organizations who were interested in electing someone who cared about their issues, so Annie's List, Victory Fund, labor unions, who literally worked together to make sure I had all the resources. Then a personal side, my family and my friends who would be out there helping knock on doors, talk to voters. I remember my first campaign, I got really sick because I had been working so hard, and it was very, very cold outside, and I was very, very sick. And my mom came into my room, and she's like, you cannot go block walk today. And I told her, I have to go block walk. It's just, I have to get out there. And she took my block walk clipboard, and she said, I'm going to go walk for you. And so my mom, with my little sister, went knocking door to door. My mom had never block walked before, but she went and knocked in the coldest day during the campaign with my younger sister, who has Down syndrome, and just went door to door and said, will you vote for my daughter? And I think to me, that my mom getting involved was probably one of the most meaningful parts of the campaign.
What about other mentors in terms of assembling a team of people who would support you, Annie's List, your family, but who are some other key people who provided strategic guidance to you, who helped you develop a political platform on issues? Tell us about those more detailed next steps in putting together the campaign beyond the ground game.
So, again, Annie's List was key, but Victory Fund helped me navigate the intersections of race and sexuality, because as an openly out LGBT Latina on the border, there was a lot to navigate in regards to the messaging in that area. So the Victory Fund was key in that respect. As far as developing a platform, that was really a collective effort, again, through the allied organizations that exist in Texas. And then talking to other state reps, Joe Moody and Joe Pickett in El Paso were great. Even Wendy Davis from Texas called. There were all these other already elected individuals who called and were really a great resource in helping to say, don't focus on some things and maybe focus on other things. But I was really fortunate that there were a lot of individuals willing to reach out.
Going back to your identity, you are the first openly pansexual elected official in the country. Can you tell us a little bit about your experience with sharing this identity publicly and reactions you got, and how you maintain that integrity to stay true to yourself?
So before I ran for office, I was an academic. And so I had written about being openly queer / pansexual. It was it was very talked about in the academic world, because there's an opportunity to have these conversations in that space. When I decided to run for office, I had a choice. I could be out or I could go back into the closet. And to me, honestly, that wasn't a choice. Specifically in the area where I live, for example, one of my opponents, while we were in the first campaign, got arrested for drug trafficking. And so my district has seen, unfortunately, some elected officials who weren't always honest with them. And so while being out is about being able to be an authentic version of myself, it is also simultaneously, and maybe even more importantly, an opportunity for me to communicate to my district that I will always be honest, that I'll always be authentic, and I will always tell them the truth, even if it's difficult, even if it's extremely personal. I mean, sharing my identity in regards to sexuality is probably one of the most personal parts of my life, of my identity circle. But the decision to do that was 50% me wanting to be authentic, but 50% me wanting to give an olive branch to my district and tell them they deserve someone who's always going to tell them the truth. And here is an example of how I'm going to do it. Because no one had that conversation politically or otherwise in this area, and here I was willing to have those conversations. It was really difficult because it's really difficult sometimes to talk about these things. But at least I can say with integrity that I have never lied to my constituents.
That's great. I'm going to now field a question from Rosemary Rivera from Georgia, who has two questions. The first is, what is the Victory Fund? And the second was, did you continue to contact them through campaigning? Continue to contact through campaigning with the elected officials that had called and encouraged you? So while you're campaigning, did you also continue to keep contact with a lot of the elected officials, and what kind of support or guidance did they provide?
So the Victory Fund is similar to an Annie's List. Victory Fund helps elect out LGBT individuals all over the country. And so, again, they come in, and so it was actually really funny. The Victory Fund donated to we could focus talking on voters as opposed to raising money. And then they sent down their political consultant to help me with messaging, communication, and because my sexuality is probably a little bit more complex, navigate some of those questions. But they sent and we joke around about this all the time, that they sent the widest guy I've ever met down to El Paso, where my district is 60% Spanish speaking at minimum, and to communicate with voters. And so it was a learning experience for the Victory Fund and a learning experience for me, but it was a great experience that really allowed for my campaign to embrace intersectionality and for the Victory Fund to embrace intersectionality.
Great. And the second question was about whether you continued to connect and follow up with and get guidance and advice from the elected officials throughout the duration of your campaign, and what was the nature of their support?
Definitely. I think that I was successful as an academic because I had mentors. And I knew that if I was going to be successful in politics, I had to develop the same network of mentors. So the original legislators who reached out to help me during my race, they were a sounding board, people I could talk to about issues, ideas, strategies, etc. But then after I got elected, and this is probably the most significant part, is that to continue to grow my mentor circle. People ask me what my favorite memory is of my first term in office. I'm ending my first term. I'm about to go into my second. And so my favorite memory happened in March during legislative session. And a lot of talk had happened about my race, about my candidacy, about my role as an elected official, being the first out LGBT woman in Texas. And so there was a lot of maybe rumors or hype about it. And so we had a lot to overcome going into the legislature. But by March, there was this conservative Republican from Corsicana, Texas, who sits behind me on the House floor. And he comes up to me and he puts his hand on my shoulder and he said, "Mary Edna," because that's what a lot of them call me, "Mary Edna, do you know you're the same age as my daughter?" And I said, "No, Chairman, I had no idea." And he said, "Well, on this House floor, you're my daughter." And to be able to develop mentors with people who are not just the same politically aligned or maybe identity similarities, but just someone completely different from me that wanted to mentor me and help me in some of the most serious issues I had to address. So, for example, there was a bill last session that was going to hurt my district because in my district we have 263 colonias. And colonias are communities that don't have basic infrastructure, sewer, water, some don't even have electricity. And so I was trying to make sure this bill didn't pass because it would hurt the colonias in my district. And a lot of people didn't understand the bill, but I went to the chairman and I talked to him and I told him I was really problematic for my district, and he helped me kill that bill. And so developing mentors is probably one of the reasons that we were able to be so successful, not only through the campaign, but most importantly, when we actually took office.
What advice do you have for young women interested in politics, public policy, a career in public life, who want to reach out to a mentor? How does that start? It seems like Annie's List found you at first, but let's say you're looking at someone, you're looking at people in your community. How do you create those connections? What's the first step or set of steps to creating a network or reaching out to a mentor?
I think the first step is getting actively involved. You're not going to find a mentor if you're not front and center and demonstrating that you have the desire and ability to be successful and effective. The reason I feel that I have so many mentors in the House is, so one time the Austin American Statesman noticed that myself and this chairman had become really good friends. And the reporter noticed that that was an odd pair. And when he asked the chairman, "Why are you so close to Mary Gonzalez?" the chairman said, "Well, she's very polite." And I think that sometimes can be a secret ingredient to the political world. The political world tends to be very traditional. And so just being polite and kind to people who are different than you or even the same can help open so many doors, because people in general want to help, right? And so I always give 3 pieces of advice in regards to being successful in politics, especially for Latinas, for women, because we can quickly or easily be put to the side or put to the margins in this world. And so we have to continue to hold our own in this space in order to do the work that is necessary for our communities. First is to be extremely hardworking. I'm very passionate. I'm very lucky that I grew up on a farm. I am used to working long hours. That has been ingrained in me since I was younger. And so hard work is always evident to the people who sometimes you don't even know are watching. The second is to be extremely knowledgeable. Sometimes people can disregard you just based on identity, but if you demonstrate that you are knowledgeable about issues, then that can build so many bridges. I am the only woman, Latina, on the Agriculture Committee. And at first when I went onto the committee, everyone was very skeptical about my interest or even ability to actively and effectively serve on the committee. Little did they know my background, that I grew up on a farm, that my father was a county extension agent, and so these are conversations that I had at the dinner table. And so when I was able to demonstrate my knowledge in regards to agriculture, I was brought into meetings, I was invited to lunches, and then always continuing to learn opened a lot of doors. And so the chairman of the Agriculture Committee ended up being another mentor that I was able to build a relationship with, because I demonstrated that I was knowledgeable and passionate. And the third is, again, being polite. That helped build so many bridges in the political world, that just being a kind and loving person, which to me is the foundation of social justice. The foundation of social justice is to love. And to demonstrate that through leadership helps build mentors.
That's fantastic. I think everyone is tweeting out and writing down notes of those three things. On the second point about being knowledgeable, I think a lot of times women, more so than men, feel like they're not ready to run because they don't know enough about the issues. They feel like, if I just spend 10 more years, or, I have the next set of constellation of jobs set up that will prepare me for this, then I'll be able to run. What do you have to say to those people, and how much do you actually learn on the job?
I wake up every day amazed at how much I learned the day before. You will learn, especially if you are a fighter, if you are passionate about this, you are going to learn every single day. I have multiple degrees. I am actively involved in learning, but I was never going to know enough to be prepared for this position. But did I have the passion and the drive to want to learn every single day? That's the most important question. Everyone will learn on the job, men and women who are interested in this, but if you're waiting to know everything, it's just never going to happen. However, I will say, the minute you decide to run for office, you should prepare. I remember when my first campaign, I met with one of my opponents, and it's the 2011 legislature, a huge conversation was around women's health. And I remember I asked him, how do you feel about women's issues? And he said to me, well, I don't know what those issues are, but if you tell me, I'll tell you how I feel. And this is a gentleman who was running for office. And at that point, I was even more encouraged to win, because it was like going to a job and not knowing what the job does. You should be able to effectively communicate at least the basics, and you should continue learning every night. But don't have these expectations that you should know everything, because no one does, and we all learn. And so the big issues, yes, but you can learn those, and they are learnable, and everything else will come day by day.
We have a question now from Pam Campos from New York City. Hi, Pam. It was great to see you at Latinas Represent New York. Pam's question is, the status quo doesn't serve us as women or Latinas. How do you navigate the quote-unquote traditional political world and party lines while fostering collaboration and holding your own values? That
is a question that I struggle with on a daily basis. The balance between wanting to be effective and connect with individuals, but maintaining an authentic self. So I'll give you an example. One night during session, I had been invited to a dinner. And the dinner was all men and myself. And during the dinner, one of the men joked around about putting, since meeting me, he had, at the dinner we were strategizing about what to do next about a particular issue. And so it was a strategy dinner meeting. And a lot of the issues that we addressed legislatively, most of the decisions don't happen on the House floor. They happen in conversations, usually where there's food involved. And so to be invited to these dinners and to be actively participatory in these dinners is very important. And so one of my colleagues said, since meeting you, Mary, I've put being with a pansexual on my bucket list. And it was a joke. It was purely a joke. He didn't mean any harm. However, as someone who identifies as an activist, as someone who has always spoken out against discrimination for LGBT folks and or for women, I got really triggered by the statement. And at that point, or do I wait and say nothing? And so I remember I excused myself, went to the restroom, took a deep breath, decided I'm not going to say anything right here and there. But that night I went home and I felt guilty. I felt guilty that maybe I should have said something. And so the next day I went and approached every single man who was at that dinner and told them why those comments were problematic and how it affected me and how it affected our relationship. So it's always a tension, and there's never a right answer. There are going to be moments in which you have to say something to maintain a sense of authenticity with yourself, and then there are going to be moments where you have to navigate it in a way, because for me, maybe I would have said something, and then maybe I would have never invaded. I have to be able to advocate for them and work collaboratively with my constituents to make sure that we are transforming a space that needs to be transformed. And so I will say this, that balance between authenticity and navigating a space that is not the most welcoming space for queer women of color, women in general, is a daily and hourly balance, tension, struggle, and sometimes it gets easier some days and sometimes it gets harder. But the tension outweighs the positives about having a woman of color in this space outweighs the tensions that you have to navigate.
We have one question that came in through Twitter from VoteRunLead. I am an avid supporter of human rights. However, I'm unfamiliar with the term pansexual. What does that mean?
Oh, that's like the question I get asked most commonly these days. I came out when I was 21 as bisexual. Anyways, I came out when I was 21 as bisexual. In my organizing and activism in the LGBT community, I recognize that gender is not a binary. That gender is a spectrum. There are multiple gender identities that exist, and in recognition of that, in recognition and reality that I could date along this gender spectrum, I searched for a word that was more, I think authenticity is a key word of the day, but it was more authentic to my worldview and experience. So I Googled, and on my research I found that there was this word pansexual that recognizes that gender is not a binary but a spectrum, and as an individual who identifies as pansexual can date along that spectrum, can date and love and be in romantic relationships along that spectrum.
Thank you. Going back to from when you were campaigning to when you first got elected, once you got elected, how did you transition from campaigning to governing? Because it seems a lot that campaigning is a lot about energy, it's a lot about hope and inspiration and change, and then governing is a different beast altogether. So can you talk a little bit about what making that transition was like, and what are some of the challenges you faced in the State House months in office?
You know, they're different because there are different types of schedules, but the foundation of both are very similar. Campaigns are symbolic representations of how you would be as an elected official. So my campaign was always about community, authenticity, leadership, and so we took those same characteristics into the elected position. So instead of saying, for example, that I want to bring natural gas to an area of my district that doesn't have natural gas and runs on propane, which we know is sometimes 4 times more expensive for low-income communities. Instead of just me doing that by myself, I work with the community to get that done, very much in a similar way that I would do that in a campaign. And so the skills that I learned in the campaign really, and because I wanted my campaign to not just be about politics, but to be about community, we were able to take all those skills and move them into the elected position. And so there wasn't that much difference because I treat my colleagues or my constituents in the same way. I use the same words, the same tones, the same message. So you would think there would be a difference, but there really isn't. The only difference really was for me the scheduling. Instead of block walking, maybe I am returning emails.
We have another question from Carmen Orozco Acosta of the National Hispanic Leadership Agenda. She says, I love the personal anecdotes like the story at the dinner you had. Can you please share a story of a mistake made early on in office and how to fix it, or how you overcame it or addressed it, and what you think others can learn from that?
Oh my gosh, identifying just one mistake is already difficult. Wow. I guess this is probably one of the, this example is very difficult because it's very in the weeds. But without getting too in the weeds, I'll just give a generalities because I think this is probably the area where I learned the most. Someone asked me to file a bill, and instead of really understanding what the bill did, I filed the bill, and then there was all of these negative conversations about that bill. And so what I think I learned in that process is that before you file a bill, completely understand it backwards and forwards. Second, before you file a bill, you should always check in with your constituents before, because at the end of the day, we're here to represent them. And even if the bill is a great idea, you have to make sure your constituents understand that understand the bill so they don't have a reaction to it. And then working past that to regain trust and relationships with the individuals who were harmed or hurt or concerned about the process. And so, and the fourth is recognizing that I made a mistake and forgiving myself and forgiving anyone else who was involved, and of dehumanization that happens. So for elected officials, we are taught to not show emotions sometimes, to say that we did this, and it's like an Abraham Lincoln anecdote. I built the log cabin and I did it all on myself. But the truth is we don't do things by ourselves, and we need a whole team of people to do anything. And anywhere along that way in that team, there are human beings. And someone, including myself or someone else involved, is going to mess up. And so how do we recognize that, heal from that, forgive, and learn. And reinforce a humanizing environment in the political world that sometimes is difficult to maintain.
I agree that especially this cycle, there's been a lot of dehumanization of politics, a lot of cynicism, a lot of people saying they're not going to vote because they don't think it makes a difference, people thinking that politics isn't a way to affect change in the same way that you initially, when you were starting off, thought that education was way, not politics. What would you say to convince those people that politics actually does make a difference in people's lives, and what is an example of something you've been able to accomplish in office that you are incredibly proud of and think has made a difference?
I have these conversations every single day with people in the community because it does make me sad. It makes me sad that people sometimes feel like, well, why should I go vote? My vote doesn't matter. And then I tell them about the San Eli School Board here in my district, who in the school board member won by 2 votes. 2 votes. 2 votes, and that person now has the access to vote on 50% of their property taxes, right? So I think there are numerous stories in local communities about how elections are really a lot more narrow than we think, and really every vote does count. And it especially counts more if you organize your family. So in my family, we all went to go vote. Yesterday was my birthday. My brother, my sister, my brother-in-law, my other brother, my mother, we all went together to go vote as a birthday gift. And so one vote is fine, but when I get my whole family to vote, then I now have 7, 10, 20 votes that I've helped organize, and that really could make a difference in a lot of these races that sometimes people aren't paying as attention to. So I think that's the first thing. The second thing is, especially in Texas, but I think Texas is, the rest of the country is dealing with very similar issues. I say we're at the crisis of a crossroads. In Texas, we are dealing with a massive water shortage for the future. I worry that we are not going to have enough water for my grandchildren. And I like to lead always with the same indigenous proverb in the back of my head, that the land was not given to us by our ancestors, but lent to us by our children. And if we're thinking about the future, the decisions we make in Texas right now, or in other states too, will determine whether or not my grandchildren or, my nieces and nephews have water. And that is a very, very, very serious conversation to have. And then I think about transportation and the fact that I was recently in India, where they have significant infrastructure issues because they have population growth. And I think I don't want a city, because what does that mean? It means your car is running for 4 hours. That means pollution is going into the air. And that means that it is difficult to breathe all that smog. And I don't want my children to have that type of environment. And then I think about public schools and the fact that we are not funding them, and that I remember during my graduate program, my professor came in and he looked really sad. And he said, it's the end of public schools as we know it, because there were a lot of education policies that were problematic to our public schools happening in Texas. And so when I think about all of these crises that maybe in the present don't seem like a crisis because things are okay, my question for people is, do they think they're going to be okay 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 30 years from now? And I think maybe I shouldn't go vote for myself, but to go vote for my children, or for my nieces or nephews, or for, people other than myself, then maybe it might encourage them to go, because voting is an act of love, not just for the present, but for the future.
Thank you. Or anyone on the chat now, feel free to type in your final questions. My last question is, what advice do you have for Latinas who are looking to become more politically involved today?
I say go full speed ahead. There is so many opportunities to be involved right now that literally all you have to do is be fearless and jump in. There are organizations, there are issues, there is a leadership gap in many ways, in many areas that they could fill. And so I would say find a couple of things that you're extremely passionate about and then get involved and then start connecting with other people in the political world, because once people start to recognize your ability, your passion, and your drive to create change, they will bring you in. The same way that Annie's List found me, there are always organizations looking for Latinas to take the next step. But the first thing you have to do is just be fearless.
We have a few fun questions. One is from Sada A from DC, who says, "Will you be my mentor?" Somewhat of a joke, but thank you so much for your time and work. You're incredible. Professor Cristina Bejarano from Kansas said that she loved hearing your quote, "Voting is an act of love," and thanks you for your story and perspective. Catalina Sanchez from California says, "Me too, what a focused and motivational Latina to have as an example." And Tatiana Mata says, "Thank you so much for caring. We need passionate and strong Latinas helping our communities." So thank you so much, Representative Gonzalez, for joining us today. But before everyone logs off, I am with some Halloween homework, an activity mapping your network. VoteRunLead is going to send this out after. You can take a screenshot if you want on the next page, but we're going to do two things. The first is identifying a leadership goal that you and when. A huge challenge and an important thing to do is to, whatever your goals are, to write them down, put pen to paper, and you can always revise them later, but really be serious and intentional about them. And the second is mapping out supporters who are able to help you. So as Representative said, building a team of people around you is really important. So here is what the worksheet will look like for developing your networking strategy. What leadership goal do you hope to achieve and by what date? 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 2016 election cycle. And in the diagram, think about all the different people who make up your life and your community. Is it your school? Like Representative Gonzalez was talking about her mentors from her academic years in graduate school. Is there an employer? Donors who are people you think could contribute to a campaign? Media contacts, party leaders, like Representative Gonzalez was talking about getting some advice from elected officials, representatives. So take some time, fill this out, keep it with you, revise it. You're all in works in progress, but we really hope that you'll consider running. Of course, get online with Latinas Represent on Twitter and share your thoughts and what you'd like to see in future webinars. And thank you. VoteRunLead says they will send out this form, but on the left-hand side in the chat, you can just click the link and download that. And in terms of the link to watch old webinars, go to voterunlead.com, go to the VRL live, and you can see some of the old webinars online. So thank you so much, and I'll just put my name in my email in the chat, Nadia_Farjood@huntalternatives.org if you have any questions and want to follow up with me. But please give us all another round of applause for Representative Mary Gonzalez. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for inviting. I truly enjoyed it. Y'all have a great day.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, and we will see you very soon. We'll follow up with the next webinar shortly. Have a wonderful Friday and a great Halloween.